Hi, Dave Staublin here, and we're going to do some good math. Today we're going to talk about section 4.1 in our textbook, and it's all about congruent figures. So here's the first definition. Congruent figures have two attributes that are as follows. Number one, they have the same size, and number two, they have the same shape. Same size, same shape. Now, more specifically, let's talk about congruent polygons. Now, polygons have all straight sides. So, for polygons to be congruent, they must have congruent corresponding parts. So let me draw a couple of figures here. And let's say that we take this figure and we reflect it, so we have an exact reflection. And we could prove that these polygons are congruent, assuming their corresponding parts are congruent. So, for example, if this side and this side are the same, and this side and this side are congruent, and this side and this side are congruent, and this fourth side is congruent with this corresponding fourth side, well, we are halfway to showing the polygons are congruent, because all the parts, all the corresponding parts have to be congruent. So this angle would have to be congruent to its corresponding angle, as would these two have to be congruent, and those two, and this fourth angle would also have to be congruent. So if all of the corresponding parts are congruent, then these two polygons are also congruent. So let's ask ourselves, are these congruent triangles? And let's draw a picture here. We'll draw a straight line, and right in the middle we'll have a dot, and we'll draw straight down, and we'll go straight up. And the things that we know about these two triangles are that those are right angles. This side is length 3, and that side's length 3. This is 4, and that is 4. And we know that these two angles are also congruent. So, are these two triangles congruent to each other? Well, we would have to show that all the corresponding parts of this triangle and this triangle are congruent. So let's see, we have a right angle and a right angle, and this angle and this angle are corresponding and equal to each other. And these two angles aren't marked, but they're vertical, so we know those two are also congruent. Very good. So all the corresponding angles are congruent. Let's check the sides. Well, we have 3 and 3, 4 and 4. Those are all corresponding and congruent. This was right triangles, so 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5. The hypotenuses are corresponding. These two triangles are congruent because all the corresponding parts are congruent. Well, let's try this again with a different set of triangles. So the question is, are these triangles congruent? So I'm going to draw an equilateral triangle like this so that these two sides are equal. Oh, it's not equilateral. That was a mistake on my part. And these two sides are equal. That's what we know. And then this angle and that angle are congruent. And that angle and that angle are congruent. And so with that information, can we determine that the triangles are congruent? Well, let's check the angles first. This angle corresponds with that angle, and they're congruent. This angle corresponds with this angle, and they're congruent. And these two are vertical angles, so they have to be congruent. So all the angles are congruent. But this is interesting. We don't know about those sides, but this side and this side are corresponding, and they are not congruent. So we can stop right there and say these two triangles are not congruent because all the corresponding parts are not congruent. All the angles pass, but right away we find that those two sides don't pass. And in fact, we know that those two don't pass, and just by visually looking, that and that don't pass either. So that brings us to a theorem. And the theorem looks like this. If we have two triangles and these corresponding angles are equal and these corresponding angles are equal, then we can determine that angle A is congruent to angle B. Even though the sides aren't congruent, we can show that the angles are. So the theorem goes like this. If two angles of a triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then the third angles are also congruent. All right, well, that's all the notes for this section. There will be an assignment, and I'll post that in another location.